me turn my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course, and man, hope y'all are doing well. Hope y'all are doing well. I was racking my brain on what was like, the pressing issue or the thing I wanted to kind of bring to the table today, and just sort of thinking about many conversations I've been fortunate enough to have with people who listen to this podcast or those who I've talked to throughout the time with the Just Be Social Club, my mastermind group, and I think, and even in general, it's interesting. I was at a meetup, kind of like a holiday party, not holiday party, with a bunch of DJ friends of mine for the company that does a lot of my bookings throughout New York and New Jersey, and I'm talking to another DJ friend of mine, who's like roughly around the same age as me, kind of been in the game for a minute, had some big moments as a DJ for a big artist, and he's kind of at a crossroads in his life where he kind of feels like he fell off a bit in comparison to what he was doing to where he is now, and is sort of falling out of love with the craft, if you will, of DJing, or maybe not even the craft of it, but the business itself, right? And where it's going. And, he was kind of expressing that to me and sort of talking to me as well, and kind of things that I've shared on here before, right? About feeling like, I don't know if I've shared it directly on here, I want to say. But like the thoughts of all these things that I used to do, right? I was definitely far more heavily involved in celebrity culture and meeting celebrities and in that world, right? If you go back to my Instagram pre-2021, it's all these posts of me with celebrities at the radio station, all these different things. And since then, I've kind of pivoted and moved into different spaces and, kind of grown a lot as a human being and whatever the case may be. And sort of welcomed, to the best of my ability, welcomed the pivot, welcomed the change, and never sort of feeling like I could get too comfortable, or trying my best to not allow my ego to make me feel like I needed to stay in a particular place if spiritually it was no longer serving me. And I don't know, I think I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't at times struggle with the idea of what if the outside world thinks that I've fallen off and all these different things, and I'd be lying if I said that sort of commentary or that conversation didn't cut a bit deep with me when I was having it, and I had to kind of have a conversation with myself to sort of check myself and sort of let myself know that hey, I'm not involved in that stuff because I couldn't hack it or because I wasn't good enough. I made a decision based on what was best for me and based on what would make me happier, and put myself in a position where my life is in a far better place than it was back then, as in terms of what my goals are, and in terms of what my my personal tastes are right now, right? My lifestyle choices and what I appreciate at this point in my life. And even with that, it's also never too late to kind of go back and rediscover that maybe you liked something far more than you thought, right? I've talked about that with music, and I think I'm beating around the bush a little bit, but I'm sort of wanting to hone in on the idea and the power of reinvention, and the idea of it never being too late to pivot. And even when you've achieved greatness, let's say, or achieved goals, you still don't should never feel like you have to be stuck in that particular zone or that particular position, right? I think that the happiest people in this world are the ones that allow themselves to embrace reinvention, or never see a failure as the end, and never see the sort of the success or the attainment of a goal as sort of now they just live on the mountaintop, right? I think you're always having to move towards something, and sort of you want to grow, you want to grow in a graceful manner that matches who you are, right? And not sort of hinder yourself playing small because it's an identity that you've grown comfortable with, right? And I'm trying not to, like, I don't know. I feel like I'm talking a little bit all over the place here, but I think many of us stay in situations that no longer serve us because we have this fear of letting go, or we have this fear of not being enough to rise to the next occasion, right? And we often self-sabotage, and we do this in various forms, right? I'd say these different examples, but they really, at its core, this is a conversation of letting go and understanding that oftentimes the next thing, or what's best for you, involves letting go of certain things that are normal to you, or certain aspects of your life, or certain parts of yourself, right? And I know we've talked about this in various forms on the podcast before, but I think this is one of those sort of ever-evolving concepts that we kind of continuously need to be reminded of or get refreshers on. And truthfully, as I sort of sit here, and we're less than, maybe we are exactly at 20 episodes left of season 3 of Life as a Gringo. 3 years of doing this podcast, and I've been doing a lot of reflecting as we sort of, started this year, and in my core thinking to myself that the identity of Life as a Gringo, right? This idea of being a quote unquote gringo, I no longer feel like that person anymore. I no longer sort of relate in the present tense or future tense to the concept of feeling like an outsider. I think, like, through the course of this podcast and doing it and meeting everybody that I have and just sort of talking things out and finding myself, I've evolved into somebody who's really comfortable in their own skin and understands his place in his community and has found community, right? And I think many of you share in a lot of that sentiment as well, who have maybe been along with the journey for a while now. And I think for me, kind of coming to season 3, and only having had the promise of 3 seasons, being fully transparent as far as, like, business side of things go, it was sort of like, okay, I mean, is this something that I see continuing on in its current state? And truthfully, it's not. I think we've sort of had the conversations that I've wanted to have, right? More than I could have ever imagined. They're here on the feed for anybody to reference for, forever how long time exists. Essentially, it's archived here. And I think I've evolved sort of past the core of this podcast, and there are other discussions and other things that I want to do. And, I'm still working out a lot of those details, personally, business-wise. But I guess I'm having this conversation because in real time I'm telling myself to not have fear of letting go of something that has changed my life for the better in so many different ways. But sort of being like, listen, you created this thing. It went beyond what you could have ever imagined. I legitimately only thought I would get one season and then it would be canceled. You know, that was what my original idea, my original, like, even just goal was for the podcast. And we ended up doing it for you know, the full 3 seasons and 3 years of my life. I'm almost 4 at this point, including with the breaks and everything. So it's wild. It's wild to sort of like be in this place. But I think it's like, if I was to say, hey, we're going to keep doing Life as a Gringo, it's like, hey, I'm not staying true to who I am as a person now, the version of me that has evolved. And not to like strike fear at anybody's hearts or make anybody sad if you love this podcast. You know, I have other things planned. Hopefully we'll kind of see what ends up happening. But this is like a message to myself as well. It's like, hey, there's a power in letting go, and understanding like you're going to step into the next evolution of who you are as a person. And that next evolution is even better, right? It's a person who has learned so much more and now has a far deeper purpose in their life because of the self-discovery they've gone on. So we'll get into more of that kind of as the season begins to get to a close. But I just want to kind of touch on a couple things and I guess share a bit of my own journey with these concepts. But also I wanted to talk about some people that inspire me when I think about their evolution and what we could take away from it. Without further ado, let's kind of just dive into some stories that continue to inspire me in a segment called For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the back. Say it louder for the people in the back.
So I'm like the biggest fan. I talk about this all the time. Anybody knows who's been like following me for a minute, I talk about the idea of like I have virtual mentors, like people I've never met. Some of them aren't even alive anymore, but whose stories I sort of keep with me in the back of my mind and I reference as I go about my own journey. And one of those stories in particular, and this one, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, this person, we can make a lot of arguments for corporate greed and the products that the company is making and how they're being made. But in general, his story never ceases to fascinate me, and that's somebody like Steve Jobs. And I start here because maybe some of us are going through an incredibly low point in our life right now. Right? Maybe there's so much uncertainty. Maybe you've had so many things taken away from you. I mean, I know I've talked about this. Like, I really do think 2024 was probably the most brutal year of my entire life. It was one of those years where it just seems like everything I touched turned to shit almost. And it was like I couldn't get like on the board to save my life, like in a sort of basketball reference. And well, I'm just gonna allow the conversation to flow as it will. Usually I would like segment this like, okay, now me gente, talk about me. But I'm gonna just kind of go where the flow goes here at. Go with the flow, if you will. But this low point, now in reflecting, and not to say I'm still not dealing with moments of frustration or that I feel like I'm sort of in a rebuilding phase, if you will, or not even rebuilding, but reinvention, I guess, is the key word of today's show. But I think that low point, as cliche as it might be, as I think about it now and we kind of talk it out here together, and now I can sort of see like hindsight, 2020 type thing. I'm like, oh, I kind of needed all of these sort of like low moments to make me sort of slow down and realign with what truly made me happy, or what truly makes me happy, right? Like, what is the life that I actually want to live? What do I want to do on a regular basis? Who am I at this point in my life? Right? And I think having that much downtime, or sort of failing at things that I wasn't very passionate about, or that I wasn't passionate enough about to like make my main focus or to provide me with real fulfillment. When those things began to fail and not work, the quote unquote easy money grabs, if you will, right? Or the things that just made perfect sense on paper, but like just didn't fucking pan out as they should have. Those shortcomings, or I mean, even, things like, losing contracts, or things not getting renewed, or whatever it might be, like those shortcomings made me sort of have to like, get back to ground zero, right? And almost just be like, you know what? And instead of trying to replicate business success, instead of trying to make more money than you did the previous year, or trying to duplicate what you did the previous year, or trying to get the next ego metric, that makes you feel like you're doing something. Let's just get down to basics of like, what is actually currently making you happy? Like, where are the moments of joy that you're sort of finding amidst all the chaos, amidst all of the shit, And I think sort of when you lose, I don't want to say everything, when you lose a lot, you inevitably, I think, end up going through these stages of like blissful creation almost, right? Like you almost get back to being a kid again, where you're just sort of creating and you're not really concerned with the financial aspect of it, right? It's like a non-issue at this point for you, right? And that's like the beauty of being in that stage. It's like, and the reality is when you start at ground zero, there's only one way to go, and that's up. And that's what's exciting and almost like to be envied about when you sort of quote unquote lose it all, right? And a story that I reference, or a person that I reference when I reflect on that, is Steve Jobs from Apple. He co-founded Apple. And when you look at his story, right, he gets, he starts Apple. It's successful, right? And then it goes through this phase in the 80s where it is, a failing company, and is no longer successful, and to the point that he actually gets kicked out of his own company. This happens in 1985. And I think about what it must have been like to be in his head at that point, what the emotions he must have been going through, right? The idea that his company that he started in a garage with a friend of his and grew to be this, name brand computer company, that he just got fired from it, and he got the company taken away from him. He got his baby taken away from him. And then the ego metrics of that, right? How publicly humiliating that must have been. And how low he must have felt, and how much he must have questioned about his ability to reinvent himself or to find success again. And even the idea of like, that sort of public humiliation from a career perspective, I'm sure to a degree hurt his reputation and his ability to secure a similar position. And you think, okay, well, what did he end up doing at this point? The irony is, this probably was the greatest thing to ever happen to him, because he gets fired from Apple, his own company, and he goes on to start Pixar, like the movie company that, like, now that Disney owns, that created Toy Story and all these things, right? Literally goes on to found a revolutionary company that changed the course of like children's movies, of cartoons and animated films. then also returns to Apple in 1997, reinvents the company completely, right? Launching the iPod and the MacBook and the iPhone. Not even changing the company, it changed the world as we know it. And again, we can make arguments for the better, for the worse, sure, but really change the world as we know it. And again, in comparison, I sort of am like, man, I really, without ever having spoken to him, I never spoke to the man, but without really having, I haven't really like dug deep into, the story of Steve Jobs. Like, I'm not a historian by any means, but I relate to it because I think, as with sort of the cliche saying of like, there's an opportunity in everything, and I always talk about that, or I always strive to live that mindset. There really is, a silver lining or a blessing even in what seems like the biggest curse, if you will, right? And I think sometimes we need a wake-up call. Sometimes life happens, right? And it's moving so quickly and we get so caught up. It's almost like a gust of wind. And before you know it, you've been blown into, an area that you don't even recognize anymore, or you've been transformed into a person that you don't recognize, that is sort of living far more in reaction than creation, if you will. And I think that this happens throughout the course of our life in multiple stages, and it's important to sort of be cognizant of it. It's easy to get so caught up in life, and especially as you're creating opportunities or being given opportunities. Like, it's a gift and a curse to have an endless amount of opportunity, which, in today's world we kind of do. But, even at the moments where you're like killing it at your job and all these different things, new promotions, like, they demand more of you. They might demand more of your time, which means less time with family, which means less time for the things that you're passionate about, the things that fulfill you. And before you know it, you're just like this person who's been working their ass off, found great career success, but like, at what cost almost, right? And I'm using this example. Or in a relationship where you sort of you've gotten swept up in the idea of love, and you've begun to normalize certain things that are just not healthy in terms of being with a partner, or you've gotten so comfortable with having a partner that you've sort of numbed yourself to the fact that you don't even really care for this person anymore in that way, right? As harsh as that might sound. And because life is happening and you want to check certain boxes, and you're just caught up in what's become the norm, and it's not until, you have that big dramatic blowout with this person, or you have some sort of crazy life moment that like shakes you to your core and makes you stop and causes you to be insanely present, that you're like, holy shit, what am I doing? And that's when you begin creating and reinventing and sort of rediscovering again. And I wanted to include that story for anybody who is going through some sort of low point in their life where it seems like just nothing is working. Everything you try is failing. And for me, what I can say is, as I've begun this year, I think for me, kind of getting back to, I guess, my story as I kind of tie it together, when I stopped saying, all right, like, let's just stop chasing what quote unquote makes sense. Let's stop trying to create what feels like the easy pathway towards the check. And, is something that we're interested in, but not like something we're, incredibly passionate about. Let's just get back to basics. Of all the things that you're doing, what is the one thing every time you do it, you're like, oh man, I'm like actually really enjoying myself today? And for me, I looked to music. Like, throughout this year, this last year, as it felt like nothing was working, the one thing that was like really providing me joy and was working in the moment was like when I got to go DJ. And specifically the one club that I have a residency at in Jersey City, New Jersey. It was like every weekend I can count on it just being like super fun and just enjoying myself. And being able to confidently like look at myself and say like, wow, you're good at this. You're great at this. Right? Like that, the win that I needed, and it kept giving it to me. And this again, like music, I've had a tumultuous relationship where I've tried to let it go and it always sort of finds me. And even with that, it's like, am I really going to like go back down this path again? Like, or am I really going to like, set another goal in this and embarrass myself or let myself down or whatever it might be? But then ironically, as I sort of tried, I let go of trying to make it make sense in like real world terms. And I just sort of said, you know what, let me just keep scratching this itch. And what are the goals that are interesting to me in regards to this? And with that, I had like, the first sort of big potential breakthrough, right? And that sort of maybe that I got from somebody then led to me saying, okay, this is the new goal. And what's the course of action to make this goal a reality? And that, happened, I think, December-ish. And from December to now, I've had purpose every single day because I've had this sort of checklist of what are the things that I need to get done? What are the things that I need to add to my resume in order to possibly make good on that maybe that I had in December and turn it into a yes. And that sense of purpose has added so much joy and fulfillment into my life. And with that sense of purpose, because I had a clarity of a goal in mind now, I've been able to check off, a lot of things, check off a lot of boxes, and stack up these little wins that hopefully will accumulate to this bigger vision that I have. But again, I don't think I would have given myself that grace or allowed myself the time that I needed these past few months of just sort of saying, hey, head down, little wins day by day. I don't think I would have been able to do that without sort of just hitting that rock bottom, because I was too fixated on maintaining a certain status or fixated on, being an adult, quote unquote, right? And it was only until it felt like everything was going wrong that I then was able to tap into what I truly wanted. And once I did that, doors began to open here and there. And don't let me, I'm not going to tell you that it's been all sunshine and rainbows. There's been so many fucking little setbacks and stupid things that have happened along the way that are incredibly frustrating. But, as I'm sort of getting to the end of that checklist, and I really only have one last thing that I need to check off that checklist before I revisit that larger goal, I can sort of say, hey, you know what? Even with those sort of disappointing moments along the way, we still had a bunch of wins that accumulated to exactly what we needed and what we set out to do. And much of it actually worked out the way we sort of envisioned it in our head. But I think that, again, is only because I had a clarity of a goal, and the goal was coming from a very pure place. A place of like genuine passion for what I was doing. Allowed all of this to sort of culminate into these wins. And I think that's what I was lacking this last year, in a lot of ideas that I loved, a lot of things that I wanted to do, but not things that I can genuinely say were 100% my heart was invested in it. And like, if that was the only thing I was able to do in this life, I would be happy doing it. I couldn't say that about a lot of the things I was working on in 2024. Again, doesn't mean I didn't love them, but as far as like day in, day out, no, they weren't something I wanted to do day in, day out. And I think that is sort of what got me to, again, the clarity. It was the heavy failure of basically the first time in my life of feeling like an entire year was like, on paper, just a giant failure. Again, in retrospect, the lessons learned, the mindset created, not a failure. But that was a year where I just felt like nothing worked. But again, I think it's led to some of my best creations. I mean, musically, we just signed a record, and it happened fairly easy, like far easier than any other music production I've ever done. And there's a lot of little things in the works like that where it's like, oh, I've been working my ass off, but also creatively, I'm in the best place I've ever been. And I think it's because of that sort of rock bottom moment. And I look at Steve Jobs, for that as well. And we'll take a quick break here. I want to touch on a couple other examples that I think I relate to and that I think others can relate to depending on where you are in your story. So we'll touch on that, but first we'll take a quick break and then we'll be right back. All right, we are back. And somebody else's story that really fucking fascinates me, like to no end, is Robert Downey Jr. Yes, the actor who plays Iron Man. Now, I'm old enough as a kid to remember hearing in like the background of like, TV on my parents' house, when I was a little kid, the stories, or like when he was going through his legal traumas and his drug addiction and, jail time and all these different things. And I think there was a show called Ally McBeal that he was on, if I'm not mistaken. I was very young, but I remember that. And it was like this guy who was talented, had everything, just went down a really dark path and was on the verge of losing it all, or burned a lot of bridges and was pretty much blackballed by the industry as a result. And now you look at him and you're like, how is that even the same fucking person? And you look at him, and I think looking at Iron Man and how that has changed the course of his life, I sort of see it as like two things. I see, it's never too late in the game for you to become the person you can be, or to re-find yourself, or to prove the naysayers wrong, right? Like you've never fucked up enough. And on the other side of it, I look at it as you just need that one win. Like you're one win away from rewriting your entire story. Him getting cast as Iron Man was a win that rewrote his entire life from there. Now, obviously, he had to do the hard work. He had to get clean. He had to get his life together. And I'm sure there's a lot that went into even being considered for a role like this one. But he did the hard work and was given this opportunity that changed everything. It allowed him to reclaim his spot as one of the prominent actors in Hollywood, in his field. It allowed him to reclaim his greatness. And again, I relate to this because it's like, okay, we've all made some wrong decisions in our life. We've all turned our back on things or people and maybe regretted it. I think if I'm relating and sort of being vulnerable to where this sort of hits me right now, I've talked about like where I was 2019 in the same industry I'm in now as far as like music goes. I really self-sabotaged a lot. And, for me, it wasn't through things of addiction or legal troubles. It was, a sense of not believing in myself or not being grateful or appreciating it as I should have. But I made some decisions that took me away from this thing that I've been passionate about since I was a kid. And again, hindsight's 20/20. I would love for it to not have been such a long, sort of journey or or take myself away for such a extended period of time. But once I've sort of done that inner work and figured out what I was running away from, and learned to appreciate myself and my talents and recognize the place that this thing has in my life and how passionate about it I am, it's allowed me now to sort of come back stronger and more focused and more sure of myself than maybe I ever have been, and allowed me to create potential opportunities that are that one thing that changes everything. I feel like I'm on the verge of that. Like I see it very clearly. Like the steps are right there. And it's inspiring, again, to know that, like, what's meant for you will never, will always be for you. What's meant for you will always be for you. But in his case as well, it's like, yeah, we all have these ghosts of our pasts, but with enough work, they become irrelevant to our future success. And once we have that success, they then become like these badges of honor of how far we've come. And they give us this sort of credibility, and they give us just this, I don't know, they give us stories that we can continue to use to inspire ourselves and others. They just add something special. And I'm again not a Robert Downey Jr. Historian, but I would imagine that experience of sort of losing it all, if you will, and then being able to sort of come back bigger than ever and reclaim your place and beyond. I'd imagine he probably appreciates it a bit more, and he's living a far more fulfilled life than he was prior. And I don't know, that's just incredibly inspiring to me. And the last one I want to touch on is Kobe Bryant. And Kobe, to me, is an example of the idea that your greatness is non-transferable. And what I mean by that is, I think so many of us, we get into these spaces where we do see success. We've achieved it, right? Our greatness is on display. We finally get that validation, that feeling of recognition that we've worked so hard for. But then there's like the curse of greatness, because it's almost like you have this identity crisis, thinking that this is who I am now, right? Like this is, when you become great at something, or you enter into sort of these bigger spaces, right? I think for me, in radio in New York and things like the Breakfast Club, a lot of the ideas like, well, it doesn't really get any bigger than this, right? A lot of the people would say, how could you leave something so big, right? Like you're a part of the biggest thing. And that's like a curse, because you then operate from this place of fear of losing that, right? Your identity is tied into that. If I'm not this person from that, then who am I? Almost like that conversation I started with, the idea of like, quote unquote, falling off, right? And sort of living with like this feeling of like, I'm not doing the things that I used to do. I'm not on that level anymore, right? And there's a fear that comes along with that. And it hinders you from growing and from achieving your next great thing, right? Like I had this, for a long time, and I've gotten over it, but I I had this fear that like in life we only have like a limited number of great ideas. And I would reflect on old projects or goals that I had that didn't pan out, like old brands or whatever that I created, or old things I was working on. And I would look back and be like, man, that was a great idea. What if I never topped that idea? Like, what if, because, my partner bailed on me and everything went to shit, or because this happened, now it didn't work anymore. What if that was my opportunity and I fucked up? Or if I did something stupid and now it failed as a result? And I think just your great ideas never stop. Maybe at some point when your mind is not there anymore, that we can make that argument. But I think greatness is transferable. The things that you have achieved are not unique to the industry or unique to the situation. They're unique to you, the person. So you, the person, has the ability to achieve greatness in other things. You just have to sort of understand the mindset that allowed you to achieve that greatness in that particular field, right? That same mindset and your ability to sort of create a plan of action and break down information and use it accordingly. You can utilize that in any other space that you choose to occupy. Now, obviously, there are certain limitations as far as just because you're a successful accountant doesn't mean you're going to be a successful NBA player, right? You need to have a certain God-given physique to go along with it that leads to that success. But outside of those sort of few examples, your greatness is transferable to whatever new thing, new venture, new idea you decide to give your energy to. And as long as you attack it with the same veracity that you did the previous one, there's no question that eventually you will achieve some form of greatness in that new goal, that new task, that new version of yourself, right? And Kobe is a great example of this, because Kobe was a guy who was obsessed with the game of basketball from, early days as a kid. This is all he did. We talk about this idea of eat, breathe, and sleep a certain thing, but that's what Kobe did. He was obsessed with it and became a great as a result. But then what did he do after retirement? Right? And a lot of players struggle with this because I think they sort of view their greatness or their achievement in basketball, in their sport, as okay, that was a window in time and that's it. And they don't realize that they're bigger than this one thing that they did. They have the ability to utilize what made them successful in that into whatever else they feel passionate about, and they have to allow themselves to not let their entire identity be wrapped up in this one thing, but instead the ability to say, I'm not just a basketball player, I am anything I want to be. And that's what Kobe did. You look at it, and Kobe became an Oscar-winning filmmaker with his short film Dear Basketball. Now, obviously, it's basketball related, but he was on the other side of things with that, right? He built Granity Studios, which was to tell sports and life stories for young athletes, right? So, granted, he was still involved again in a game he loved, but it was from a different perspective, and he was achieving greatness in that. He also reinvented himself as a mentor, an investor, and an advocate for women's sports, right? Because of his daughter, Gigi. So he was walking into the next chapter of his life with open arms and not being wrapped up in the idea of, I have to be Kobe Bryant, the basketball player, and that's all I am. He said, no, I'm Kobe Bryant now, the storyteller, the filmmaker, the mentor, the entrepreneur. And he was finding success in those fields because he was attacking it with the same mindset that gave him success in basketball. Because again, the greatness is bigger than the identity. Right? He was just a great thinker who happened to be born with a certain natural gift for basketball, but there are a lot of people born with that natural gift that don't achieve the level he did. Right? So really the secret sauce is the way that his mind worked, which then led to the way that he was disciplined and the way that he was able to devote all that time and energy to getting better at basketball and really becoming a student of the game. And again, those are skills that can be transferable to any other industry that he chose to get into after basketball. And that's why he was, getting these accolades as a filmmaker and in these different avenues. And I'm sure if he hadn't sadly passed away so early, there would have been all kinds of crazy shit that he would have had his hand in. But again, it's because greatness is transferable. Don't allow yourself to make what you're doing your entire identity and then believe that you just have to stay there even if it's no longer serving you, or even if you're no longer able to do it at the level that you once did in his case. Like for me, I guess I'll leave you on this example, what is kind of coming up for me. What got me into the rooms like the Breakfast Club or being on the radio here in New York on Z100, the mindset, the tenacity, the ability to sort of think a couple steps ahead, to get into those, what got me in those rooms, all the little things. That is the same thing that has gotten me into other rooms when I was in a band. That's what got us management, got us on tours, got us doing, a record, got a record deal on the table as a DJ. That's what got me from playing dive bars to playing, gigantic clubs and festivals, and, got me from making, crappy music and that nobody want to listen to working with other record labels and signing music and getting put in commercials. Like that same blueprint, that same mindset that I have, and I think the ability to break down information and the self-awareness of how I fit into it is what keeps allowing me to get into the rooms that I am passionate about at that moment. And if I'm no longer passionate about a certain room, I have to be okay with letting go of the ego metrics and be confident enough in myself to say, I don't know how long it's going to take, but eventually I will get into a similar level room, but instead doing something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And I think along sort of, and I think I'm now like, all right, what is sort of in 2024, where was the shortcoming with that? In 2024, I was too concerned with, I made the room itself the priority or the goal, rather than saying the passion has to be the priority, and then second to that is the room itself and the goal. Right? I think it always has to start with, like, how do you reinvent yourself? How do you re-achieve success? It always has to start with, like, what is the burning desire? Don't think about the money. Don't think about what is the burning desire. Once you've identified the burning desire, then all of the skills that you have accumulated that have allowed you to find success in the past at other things, you can then retool them to work for this new burning desire that you have. And that greatness that exists in those tools and exists inside of you can then be applied to this new endeavor, as long as you have that burning passion, that same burning passion that you have for the other things that you found success at. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, I think, again, with all these different stories, no matter what's happening, no matter where you are, Reinvention is there for you. You just have to be unafraid to take a step in that direction and be unafraid to pivot from the life you know and the identity that you have sort of come to rely on, if you will. And I'll table it there because I think I want to kind of summarize it a little bit clearer in conclusions too. But first, we'll take a quick break and then we'll be right back.
Time for conclusions soon.
All right, so just to kind of summarize this entire concept of reinvention and being unafraid to pivot, recognizing that it's never too late to pivot, recognizing that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, that the greatness of your past is just evidence of your ability to create more greatness going forward. And if you haven't had that moment yet, which I think we've all had it in little ways, but if you haven't had that moment yet, understanding that we all have greatness inside of us, we just have to match it with the right passion and the right moment and the right opportunity, or create the right opportunity. And again, it's sort of looking for opportunity and everything, I think, is kind of the takeaway from like Steve Jobs, right? His biggest failure became a blessing because he had the clarity to sort of go and really go into like the deeper parts of his brain and challenge himself to do something new and different. And it led to Pixar, and it led to, reinventing Apple as a whole with things like the iPad, iPhone, and MacBook. I look at somebody like Robert Downey Jr., where all the mistakes he made still did not hold him back from reclaiming his spot and going beyond even that, right? He did the hard work to clean up his act on a personal level. And once he did that, he was able to create the opportunity to get him back to where he was supposed to be. And the part B to that is, it only takes one opportunity to change everything. So no matter what you're going through, no matter where you feel like you're stuck, and you feel like you're so far away from where you want to be, understanding that it just takes one win to change everything. That one win sets you up on a completely different path. So it's not about racking up all these gigantic things. It's literally just trying to find that one yes, that next yes. Because that next yes leads you to the next thing. And then with Kobe, it's understanding that greatness is transferable. Your greatness in one area can be replicated to the next thing, as long as it's something you're passionate about, as long as it's something that you can give the same energy to that you did on the previous thing that you found success at. And don't be afraid of the next thing. When you've outgrown something, don't feel like it's the end of the world. Don't allow it to take over your identity and dictate who you are as a person. You're more than just the one thing that you're doing. You have the ability to continue to do different things and reinvent yourself and recreate your life anytime you see fit. You have that inside of you. The things that got you to that other place that you're proud of will also get you to the next evolution of your life, the next chapter, the next story that you can be proud of. Again, greatness is transferable. And I think with me, as I kind of, was started talking about life as a gringo and all these things, it's being unafraid to say, what's next? I appreciate and have done all this stuff, but I'm also understanding that I'm not going to allow myself to hinder my creativity or my growth by just trying to stay in what's comfortable and what has worked. I understand that I'm destined for even more. And I've had the blessing of failure on a deep level, which has then allowed me to have no choice but to go inside and really rediscover the thing that burns inside of me, the passion that's inside of me. And as a result, I'm feeling far more like myself and far more excited for what comes next. And it's never too late to pivot. And in fact, I think life is just a continuous series of pivots in some way, shape, or form in different areas of our life until, one day the lights are out, essentially. And our happiness and continued fulfillment are always on the other side of, taking account of what's not working and being unafraid to reinvent ourselves, to challenge ourselves, to say, hey, what's next? What does this version of myself want? I know some of this might sound a little bit redundant. I know I've done episodes on this in the past, but I think it's important to sort of have these reminders, like these core concepts, which I really do think the art of pivoting is a core concept that we all need to like ingrain in our brains and allow it to live in the back of our head, that we can then reference it when needed, because it's something that always exists in our life and I think is ever evolving. So with that said, thank y'all so much for tuning in. I hope this was insightful. Let me know in the DMs at DJ Dramos on Instagram. Whenever you get something from the episode, I really do appreciate hearing your feedback. With that said, I'll catch you on Thursday for our Thursday Trends episode. Till then, stay safe and we'll talk soon. Peace.